Welcome to the Collaborative Canvas, where we bring you insights and inspirations from industry leaders who are shaping the future of the business and the personal growth. I'm your host, Ankesh Saxena, and today's episode is nothing short of transformative. What if inspiring, motivating, and stretching your insights team to reach their full potential was no longer a challenge? That's the question today's guest, Lara Meyers, have been asking throughout her near 20 years of careers in research and insights. Lara's journey from feeling stressed and stretched thin to discovering the life changing power of coaching has led her to become a researcher turned coach. Now, she partners with senior leaders, businesses to help them find the sweet spot between high performance and happiness. Whether it's a thorough motivational talk, bespoke trainings, or corporate mental fitness program. So, if you've not checked that out, one of them has just got published this morning. Lara is redefining what it means to lead with ease and resilience. And if you're ready to discover tools to destroy mental limitations, again, check out her post this morning. Build happier and more collaborative teams and achieve your personal and professional best. This episode is for you. And before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an inspiring conversations like this one. So moving on to the episode, welcome Lara on the show.
Oh, welcome, Ankesh. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Lara. And as I said to in fact, mentioned this to my audience and listeners that, switched from being insights professional to a podcaster so I can bring more of experts' opinion onto the ground and people can hear them directly. What motivated you to make that shift to the coaching?
Well, I think there's a few parts to that story, but I think the aspect that I want to really highlight to people on today's episode is um, part of me making this switch from being a research and insights professional into supporting the industry with coaching actually came about through some personal transition in my life. So, about 5 years ago now, my husband and I decided that we wanted to embark on an adventure and to move abroad. And he got a job in Bahrain, which is where I now live and where we're based. Every day I searched for research jobs that I could do once we arrived. I scoured job boards, I was sending out applications, and was really trying to kind of envisage how my career was going to continue in this new chapter. But one of the things I hadn't really planned for at that time was, unlike London, where I had been based before, and huge, vibrant research and insights industry and community in London. Bahrain is a teeny tiny little country of only 1.5 million population total. So the heads of insight jobs that I had imagined that I was going to be doing as the next step in my career, they just simply didn't exist here. And so after 6 months of searching, I had to turn up literally nothing. And I'd really started to believe that, I wouldn't be able to work when we moved here. And I even questioned whether I should join him on the adventure that we'd been planning. Um, and because of that, I began exploring other alternatives, initially kind of adjacent fields, like maybe moving into marketing, something like that. But I started to question kind of what aspects of my career had I always really enjoyed. And that had always been consistently helping people in my team, people who reported me, to learn and grow in their careers. And so, because of that, I decided to take what felt at the time like a bold step and enroll in a coaching course. It felt like a kind of natural progression once I'd really identified that um, helping others with their personal growth and development felt really aligned with who I am as a person. And so that eventually led me into, being a certified coach and starting to build the business that I now have today, where, like you mentioned in your intro, I'm working with leaders in the insights industry.
Hey, within the intro, I also mentioned about, how you're balancing a strike between high performance teams and the happiness. I mean, I think with larger organizations, we always face the challenge of being overworked, especially in the market research environment where um, we never see there's an end to anything. I mean, honestly, we don't want there's an end to anything, but it sometimes becomes really overwhelming for anybody to be in that same zone. So talked about that sweet spot between high performance and happiness. I want you to help me understand how do you actually encourage leaders to strike that kind of a balance between them.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And, you're exactly right. This is a very pervasive issue in the industry. Um, and partly, I think it's because we're a bit of a product of our own success. Like, there is a big demand from companies and organizations to have research and insights. Um, but when you're kind of in the thick of it, it can feel extremely overwhelming. And I know from my journey, I've certainly burnt out a couple of times trying to navigate those pressures. And now, having spent, hundreds of hours coaching others in the industry, you can be a top performer, doing great, hitting deadlines, doing great research. But if you come home exhausted, or you don't really feel like you've got the energy to spend with your friends or family, then there is something not right in the balance. And so the first part is really about being honest of where you're at. If you are knocking it out the park, but unhappy in other areas of your life, then it's worth questioning, what's going on there and where the unhappiness is showing up, and whether parts of the way that you're operating at work might be impacting that. Um, I mean, for example, I had a client who would work really, really long hours, partly because they were a very conscientious, dedicated individual, partly because they struggled to delegate. And they would get home exhausted, but then they would stay up even later watching TV because they felt like they couldn't unwind, which meant that they went into the next day feeling even more tired, a bit on the back foot, which led them to work late again. And you can kind of see how it becomes a bit of an ongoing cycle. So being honest about that, and really identifying the areas where um, there might be an issue or imbalance, is really the first step for overcoming it.
I think Lara, you actually gave a very great example about how a manager feels overwhelmed when they go home and they watch TV. I that gave me a thought that I generally used to watch a few say TikTok videos or reels where we talk about how to become a better person, right? Wake up early in the morning, don't look at your phones too often, do exercise and stuff like that. There's a whole chart of it by the before you actually go to the sleep. But in considering, when we talk about mental limitations, and even most of the time when you talk about mental health, um, given the situation that we work in an environment which is like very tedious. Everybody gets off from the work, go back home. They really wanted to cheer themselves up with their family members, but never happens because by the time they reach home, somebody would call them and say that there's a crash in the server and you have to pick it up again, or there's some project issue that you have to pick it up again. How these common mental barriers, I would consider them as a mental barrier, considering that I really wanted to hang out, chill, and I'm not. So how these, on a given day, any leader specifically who has been given responsibility to manage the entire organization, there's so much of, things going back and forth. What are those common, mental barriers that you picked it up? And when do that 40-second conversation with your audience, how can you, also identify, what are those and how can we actually overcome those?
Yeah, I mean, That is a great question. And I think one of the things that I've learned on my coaching and mental fitness journey is that, we all have some kind of mental limitations or some kind of fixed mindset that we might find ourselves in. And it's often those stories that we tell ourselves about the way circumstances are or the way that what's possible for us in a certain situation. And those kind of stories can really keep us as leaders really stuck in the same uh, operating mode that isn't necessarily helping us in the situation that we're in. And one of the frameworks that I use and I train people on is an idea called saboteurs. So we all have these inner saboteurs within our minds, and they are kind of an automated self-sabotaging behavior. So, for example, if you are a leader who is, quite visionary, confident, great at taking charge, the mental limitation for you might be actually struggling to let go and micromanaging your team when the stakes are high, which doesn't help them to feel empowered or trusted to get on with their work. And that kind of creates a dynamic whereby the people in the team then constantly are going back to the leader, asking for advice, asking for input, and it reinforces the whole loop of that particular leader feeling like they have to be in charge, they have to micromanage things. And so these kind of inner saboteurs, once they take hold, they can have a real contagion effect within teams if leaders don't take the first steps themselves to become aware and address their own behaviors.
I think that's a great point, considering tend to see a lot of people who wanted to really micromanage themselves. Yes, they are visionary, they have started up an organization, but at the end of the day, they don't want to let go of things. Managing them and that psychology is definitely, a task. How do you manage these kind of a leaders? What kind of a practice do you involve so that, they have a fresh mind every day that they come to the office, they don't have a backlog, and they have, designated team to take care of all the things that they really wanted to rather than getting into the nitty gritties of it. How do you manage those kind of leaders?
Well, I think it's actually the same for all leaders, the process that I would take them through, whether their kind of personal self-sabotaging tendency was one of being overly controlling, or if it was one of being, overly perfectionist and into too many details. It doesn't necessarily matter what the type of saboteur is, but what I would train and encourage all of these leaders to do is first become aware of and spot their saboteurs. And there is a great free online assessment that anyone can take. It takes about 10 minutes. It's actually really fun and insightful. You can get to see the strength of your own personal saboteurs. Um, but also, I teach some techniques about taking control of your mind. And sometimes when I say something like that, people are like, well, of course I'm in control of my mind. But a lot of the time, we don't realize how much our mind is kind of just drifting off onto other thoughts. How many times are you doing something or maybe walking around your home even, and you think, how did I get into this room? Or you're in the middle of a task and all of a sudden you realize that you're thinking about something else. So I teach leaders how to take control of their mind so that when they spot whatever their individual top saboteur is, they can stop it in its tracks and then choose a different, more constructive, positive response rather than, in the example we were using before, rather than micromanaging the team, it might be, having a conversation with them and being really curious, putting the researcher's hat on, literally, and exploring, maybe why certain things haven't progressed as much as that leader would have liked. But using, other tools in the toolbox other than some of those self-sabotaging aspects.
I think again that's as we speak, there's so many things which are coming out of it. One is a micromanage leader, how you can actually manage that, and I think that's a very vital point because even I believe, taking control of your mind becomes pretty evident. If you really have to work things out. First of all, when you're controlling your mind, you really have to have a very calm mind because considering the situation we've been talking more and more about, things are not always the same as they look or as we feel them given day and time. And considering post COVID, we have been seeing, we're keeping a hybrid situation. And within, creating a resilient team or somebody who's very collaborative, we are ensuring that even they're working from home, they're ensuring everything happens. What strategies would you recommend in that case, that a leader should ensure that they're building a collaborative environment as well as a resilient environment?
Yeah. And to your point, this challenge of building collaborative, resilient environments has never been easy. But I
Yeah.
think it's even harder in today's world of remote and hybrid working situations. Um, so the very first thing that is absolutely fundamental is having a very clear team purpose and vision, that everybody understands, and if there's an opportunity to do so, has contributed to. But if they haven't had an opportunity to contribute to, maybe they joined the team after it was created, for example, they at least understand it and buy into. And it's on three levels. It's on how does our team support the overall company vision? What our team vision is, like why do we exist? What are we helping the business to achieve? But also then how does that relate to me as an individual and how that connects with me and my values and what's important to me. So kind of getting that purpose and vision is absolutely critical for bringing teams together and helping them collaborate. The other aspects, kind of speaking more to, I would say, the resilience part of the team, because it's great to have that North Star, that direction, but like you say, the environment is ever changing. There are going to be bumps along the road. There's going to be curveballs. And so really starting to foster earned trust between the people within the team. Um, really believing that, your colleagues have got your back and you've got theirs. And part of that comes from holding each other to account. If someone else in the team has committed to do something and for whatever reason they haven't delivered on it, it shouldn't only be the job of the leader to be able to call out the person and have a conversation with them on why that hasn't happened. Because if everybody trusts each other, then that conversation should be able to happen naturally. And part of that is, of course, being able to disagree and have conflict, but in a healthy, constructive way. And that as well can be very, very valuable for building trust within teams. If you ever think of someone you've had a big argument with, if you've actually repaired and worked through it afterwards, often it leaves that relationship stronger. So those are the aspects that I work with teams to build once they've uncovered their individual saboteurs, once they know how they might be getting in each other's way or getting in their own way, we work on the purpose, the accountability, the trust, dealing with conflict, because that's really what helps build this fantastic dynamic of collaboration and resilience.
This is like very coincidental moment for me because I was talking to one of the authors of a book called Hope is Not a Strategy about the purpose. And we were also talking about the collaborative effort and the resilience, when it comes down from top to bottom, with what exactly the leader thinks and how he can inculcate the same purpose into the people of his organization so that they work on the same tandem. It's not that I have some certain things I've thought of and then I'm telling you that this is your job description and you really have to work upon. Considering that, again, dynamic situation, things don't happen the way we feel, and there's always meter that runs for our lives where we always think what best I can do so that I can get a promotion, or what is that I should work on my personal growth or to become a leader. What would you recommend? Because when we go through all these dynamic changes, often our own developments get neglected. And I've been hearing
Mm.
your thought-provoking sessions, and I realize there's always a different element that you talk about, other than whom you're actually meeting. Because even I remember my conversation with you in Dubai, you were very spot on personal growth when it comes to identifying your own self, and you just mentioned that taking control of your mind. So can you just walk us through about that a little in detail?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of pick up on that insight that you just shared there, which I totally agree with, you know, often leaders do neglect their own development, and not by choice, not because they mean to. Very often, the leaders that I'm working with are people who are, very focused on both the output, the deliverable for their clients, their organizations, but also supporting their teams. And so, it's something that, again, is almost like a bit of a strength taken too far in a way that, so much focus on delivering that fantastic performance, supporting the growth and the learning opportunities for others. Um, they perhaps overlook, they don't have time for um, making that room for themselves. And I think, the more you progress in your career, the less it's about just going on some training course to learn a new skill. In the early years of your career, it's fairly easy. It's like, okay, if I'm starting off and I'm, to go back to the when I started out 20 years ago, if you're being in a quant type role, you will have certain things that you need to learn. You just have to learn how to draft a questionnaire. You have to learn how to check tables, etc., etc. They're very kind of fixed, clear, obvious things that you need to do, and they are, real skills. When you start becoming a leader and having larger and larger teams, often that development is more about how you are showing up yourself. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are the areas that you need to improve upon as a person, as a leader, with your mindset? And as humans, I feel like we're not always that good at spotting those things in ourselves. It's a much harder job to do that for ourselves than it is to say, all right, the next thing I need to learn is, how to use SPSS. You can't even compare them. And that's why I think, the more leaders get into their roles, it can look like they might be neglecting their own development, not out of choice, but because it's harder to spot what maybe you need to do. Um, but the first thing, any organizations that offer things like 360 feedback, is always a really great place to start to get some awareness of where your strengths are, where some areas might be that you need to work on. But also, I think it comes back to, having a bit of time for self-exploration and, on an annual basis, at least, checking in with yourself and asking, where am I at in my career? where would I like to be, in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? You don't need to have it all pinned down, but that can help to start give you a bit of a roadmap from where you are now to where you want to be as a leader. Um, and yeah, I mean, of course, then working with a coach or a mentor or, someone who's going to help you work on those areas you've identified, can be a really great way to fast track enhancing yourself in whatever areas it might be.
I guess you made a very vital point. Most of those leaders, they really wanted to work upon their own self development, and the question that you just raised, where do I really wanted to become, when do I really wanted to become, where do I really wanted to go, how much time do I need? I may pen it down on a piece of paper, but at the end of the day, I think I'm not actually working on it, which is where, the help of a coach is definitely needed. So when you actually guide them, I mean, I'm sure, you must be dealing with a lot of leaders, and every person is a different person altogether in himself. And, managing them, measuring them for yourself becomes a tedious task. And eventually, since they are your clients as well, they really wanted to see where they're heading to, because they've been working closely with you to improve themselves. How do you manage all these things? How do you measure all these things? And how do you, show them that kind of an impact?
Well, I mean, that is a great question. Obviously, as a researcher, I love being able to help my clients measure their progress, whether it's for them as an individual or for, their wider team or organization. So, we always start off with some kind of benchmarking. If they're doing the mental fitness program with me, there are some very specific tools that we use for that. Um, but more broadly, doing an assessment of, how the individual or organization is looking at the moment. What's our starting point? What's our benchmark? And we use that to inform what are the goals that we're going to work on. So there are always some really, really clear goals, both with quite tangible things that we can measure. So it might be something very tangible. Won't surprise you to hear me say this. A lot of people say, I would like to earn a promotion. So that would be a very clear goal, and it's a very easy one to measure. Do you have it or do you not? But on the way there, we'll probably be measuring other, slightly less obvious things like, how confident does someone feel? At the start of the relationship, when I'm working with them, maybe they don't feel confident about getting that promotion. If they rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 10, there might be a 3, and they'd be able to describe what that feels like for them. And then we'll check in. How are you feeling over the time of doing the training, the coaching, and so on? So there are other indicators that can help to support seeing the progress happen, even if that big goal hasn't necessarily been reached yet. And, a lot of the time, um, the greatest evidence comes from the small shifts. It's the leader who says to me, wow, I never imagined that I would have stood up in that meeting and really shared my opinions about something that was about to happen in the business, because I wouldn't have felt like my voice was welcome there. To then seeing I did stand up and I shared my opinions, and it felt great to be able to do it, because I know it's helped bring other vital conversations into whatever changes this business is about to embark upon. And it's sometimes those small moments of self-realization that we couldn't have put a specific goal or target around, but that also becomes the evidence of the shift that is happening in their mindset, in their leadership abilities. Um, so it's kind of taking all of those things together and checking in on them on a regular basis, making sure, do we need to course correct anywhere? and also celebrating those moments where things have shifted. You have done something that maybe you didn't imagine that you could do before, because that's what helps to sustain the momentum.
And that's when I said this episode will be a transformative one for you because not just, we're talking about how we can transform our own journey, but with the help of a coach, what is the best possible solution and strategies we can implement in our lives? Of course, I would 100% agree to this point that everything starts from here. So if you can control your mind, you can actually do anything. And which is why a lot many people emphasize more on your mental wellness and then, your physical attributes towards your organization. It's because if you're not controlling your mind, you're actually everywhere, and it doesn't work that ways, and which is why when you come back and ask for a promotion, you don't get it because of course, since you have not controlled your mind, you're not very clear about what's your target, you have not projected yourselves into the right trajectory, and you're not working towards it. And when this doesn't happen, the practice gets missed. It's just like, you get bowled on the very first ball. So, ladies and gentlemen, if this is resonating with you, I would encourage you to reach out to Lara. Lara has tremendous experience in, helping overcome leaders with every single basic or minute issues that they face during the organization when they really wanted to grow and make sure that their organization grows as they grow along with them. So if this is resonating with you, please feel free to reach out to her. And my heartful thank to you, Lara, as well, for sharing your inspiring journey and the powerful strategies for unlocking the potential of the Insights team. And again, as Lara highlighted, the path to high performance and happiness begins with prioritizing your own personal growth and fostering a culture of resilience and collaboration. So, ladies and gentlemen, if this is really helpful to you, I have been putting a lot of efforts to bring such inspiring leaders onto the channel. I would need you to and request you to go and subscribe my channel and hit that bell icon so you never miss an update. And do comment. If you have any questions, just drop it down into the description box, and I will ensure that either of us would come back to you or I'll connect you with Lara so you can get your answers done. And until next time, always stay curious, stay collaborative, and keep painting that canvas with me and with a purpose. I am Ankesh Saxena signing off. Thank you so much, Lara.
Thanks, Ankesh.